something
So,
negative.
Rabbi, you said this, 2 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago. This is the weird infinitive.
Yeah, it's the weird guy.
Weird.
Weird guy. Yep, exactly. Okay, sorry, I was multitasking. That's it. Okay, here we go. Let's look at our weird guy some more now. All right. So, concerning the infinitive absolutes, I like those explanations from this grammar called Learning Biblical Hebrew Reading for Comprehension by Kutz and Goldsberger. So the highlights of the main verb, it highlights the main verb. That's the first thing that the infinitive absolute can do, right? So it often appears next to a regular verb. So the verb is conjugated normally in order to highlight or emphasize the action of the verb. Okay? Most of the time, the infinitive and verb are from the same verbal root. Not always. You're going to find that halach shows up often as an infinitive absolute with another verbal form. For some reason, haloch will just show up in there, like going, like it expresses like continuing, something like that. But most of the time, they're the same roots, right? Grammarians refer to this infinitive as a cognate accusative. So you're not going to need to know that unless you're getting into some advanced grammar books. Context always determines the nuance of meaning conveyed by the infinitive absolute. So what conveys the meaning? What gives us the meaning? Context. Context. Always determines the nuance of meaning conveyed by the infinitive absolute. The following examples summarize the most common nuances of, I don't want to keep saying infinitive absolute, of it when it is used to enhance the meaning of another verb in the sentence. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So we're talking now about infinitive absolute when it is adding emphasis, adding some kind of emphasis. All right, usually that emphasis is surely, right? Definitely. Hope that's spelled. That looks wrong to me, but like I said, German wrecked my English spelling because they have so many words that are similar to English, but they're written differently. It really starts. I always doubt my spelling now in English. So, surely, an infinitive absolute can be used alongside a regular verb to express certainty. For example, the expression "haloch halachta" from Genesis 31, verse 30, literally says, "Going, you have gone." But we would never translate that way, right? That's a terrible translation. In context, the verb reads, "Now you have certainly gone because you long for your father's house." Right? Indeed, you have gone. Right?
That
Sometimes,
was that was what Laban said to Jacob.
nice. Nice. Thank you for that. Excellent. And another way of showing emphasis is to show a continual or progressive action. So, continually. So, the infinitive absolute can be used alongside a regular verb to express the ongoing or continual nature of an action. A common example is seen when halach, often in combination with other infinitive absolute, is used to modify a regular verb. For example, the phrase in Genesis 26, verse 13, Vayigdal ha'ish, vayelech haloch vegader. Literally, the man became great, and he went going and growing. Says of Isaac that he became great and continued to increase. So we have continued. Continued. So it's still a kind of emphasis, right? We're still emphasizing the verb being used. In this case, yelech, this is from halach, right? So notice the pattern here. This text doesn't talk about it, but you'll notice that usually when the infinitive absolute comes after the verb, the usual pattern we're going to see from this is ongoing action. Ongoing or continuous. So for example, when we have mot yumat, right? The person who violates the Sabbath day and mot yumat shall definitely be killed, right? So the infinitive absolute comes first. Mot. Mot. Mot yumat. Shall definitely be killed. Hold on, I just need to take a drink of water first. 1 second, sorry. Thanks for that, excuse me. Okay, but when you change, if I were to change the order and say the person who violates Shabbat, yumat mot, it sounds very strange because probably that means shall continuously be killed, right? So maybe we're talking about like Gehenna, something, like what happens to certain sinners. They're like, who knows how they're punished. Right? There's lots of stories. Continually being murdered or whatever, who knows? Okay, everybody's with me? Let's look at more of our strange verbal form. Okay, this next slide discusses infinitive absolute manner, right? Like the way in which something happens. So it can indicate manner. An infinitive absolute can be used alongside a regular verb to reflect how an action is carried out. For example, the expression from Genesis 43, verse 7, Sha'ol sha'al, asking he asked, is literally what it says, suggests in the context that the man question the man questioned us carefully about ourselves and our relatives, you see? So it's implying, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to say, he definitely asked us, right? But he carefully asked us. He's investigating, right? Again, it's still a kind of emphasizing aspect of the verb, but the context can help you to understand how to translate that. All right, so you don't need to memorize English meanings of these things. Instead, you need to understand the basic idea. Okay, we're going to give some more. We're not done. We're not done with infinitive absolute. This is just on the verbal side of things. Okay, now it gets spooky. Okay, we're still as a verb, sorry. Okay, so it's still kind of spooky. As a verb. So the infinitive absolute can be a substitute for a regular verb. In some instances, the infinitive absolute is used in place of a main verb. When this happens, it can represent any kind of verb, any kind. Perfect, imperfect, imperative, although this is, in my experience, this is far more common that it stands in for an imperative, or for an active participle. Right? Okay, let me just put that in here. This might be, again, it's just my observation, but it seems to me, while it can be any of these forms, go back. Fine. Okay. It can be any of these, but in my experience, usually, most often, it behaves either as an active participle or as an imperative. Okay. Yeah, it can be perfect or imperfect, but that's more rare. Elements like person, number, and tense must all be determined from context. Right? He's not going to give it to you. He's going to be a true wild card. One familiar example of this use of the infinitive absolute is found in the Ten Commandments. Zachor, as we talked about recently, right? Remember the Sabbath day. So here, it's being used like an imperative, like a command. Although Rashi, you guys probably remember, comments on this, that the reason that the infinitive absolute is used for both Zachor and for Shamor in the other giving of the Ten Commandments, they're both infinitive absolutes, is that this is hinting about an ongoing action, right? Yeah, there's many theories why it's being used. Like I mentioned, Rashi and other sages mentioned in other places too that there's a hint about an ongoing action. That's why that's used in that case. Nevertheless, you just need to recognize that it can be used in place of a regular verb. All right. We cannot. I don't think we can make definitively the argument, for example, that Rashi makes with Zachor, and Shamor, meaning it's telling us to do this as an ongoing action. From Yiddishkeit, yeah, we can agree with our sage, and I like his opinion. It makes some sense to me. Because why not just use the imperative, right? There has to be a reason, stylistically, to use the infinitive absolute there, and it might very well be that emphasizing function, right? Zachor, Shamur, right? But grammatically, we cannot make the full argument that is because it's absent the other verb. It's not saying zachor tizkor, right? It just says zachor. It's by itself. The full strength version would have been zachor tizkor. You shall definitely remember, or tizkor zachor. You shall continually remember, right? That would have been the full blown grammatical hands down argument, right? So it's a bit of a weaker argument. We can infer that it's hinting about an ongoing action, yes, but it's grammatically it is controversial, okay, to be intellectually honest about it. Okay, more weirdness. Infinitive absolute as a noun. What? What? Sometimes it stands in place of a noun. Sometimes when a person is talking about an abstract verbal idea, they may use an infinitive absolute as the subject or object of the sentence instead of a noun. For example, Isaiah 1:17 uses an infinitive absolute in a manner identical to the following clause that uses a noun. Learn doing good. Infinitive absolute. Seek justice. Okay? So with Hebrew parallelism, the second part is an absolute noun. Justice. But the first part, the doing good, is infinitive absolute. The IA is used because the slot in the sentence requires a noun. More specifically, a noun that refers to or labels an action. Hebrew was lacking a noun that meant doing good, right? So in this case, the prophet uses a verb instead as a stand-in. Would you guys like to see that verse? Maybe I should pull that verse up. That might be useful.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's look at it. Okay, 1:17. Okay, let's see here. Okay. I'm going to make this panel float. Open the window. And then bring it down. Okay. You can see I've got my notes in there. Make it a bit bigger. All right. Limdu from lamad. So this is an imperative plural form, right? Limdu. Study, like learn. Heitev. Heitev. So heitev, here we have, this is actually a he-fill infinitive absolute. You can tell from the hey there, right? Heitev. Learn, doing good. Learn, making things work out well. Dirshu from the Rosh. Seek, like look for. Mishpat, justice. So here's our infinitive absolute, the heitev. And we have actually from the, if you ever have heard or prayed the Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, there's part where we say, who hativ, who meitiv, who yetiv lanu, who gamlanu, who gamlenu la'am, lachen, lachesed, l'rachamim, v'hatza, v'hatzlacha, anyway, so the who hativ, he does good, right? He's the one who does good things, meaning Elohim. Okay? Yeah, that was good to see. All right. So it can be a noun. Oh, is that my last one? Okay. Okay, any questions on our friend, the infinitive absolute?
So mechanically, how would you say, was that hey shib or hey Dave?
Interesting. You just made it like Aramaic. But yeah, you translated to Aramaic just now. Go ahead. I'm sorry, that's your question. Go ahead.
Yeah. But how would you say or translate in a mechanical fashion the hey Dave? Because it's a he feel, it's a causative active.
Yeah. So the idea is, what is being caused? Causing tov. It's causing goodness, right? He causes goodness, or he causes beneficence, something like that, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So
Okay. Thank
try
you.
to cause the good, right? You could mechanically say try to cause tov, right, to happen to
Mhm.
people in situations.
Yeah, which is doing good.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yep. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Yeah, sure. Usually, what you guys are going to find is the infinitive absolute. You might be reading a verse and you're like, what is that doing there? I advise you skip over it, read the rest of the verse, and then usually it falls into place in context. Ah, okay. That's being a noun here, right? Especially when you compare, you use parallelism, right? You see what's in the first clause, what's in the second clause, what verbs do I have. You can kind of narrow down and find out, right? Most of the time, it's next to the same verb, right? Motumat, right? Right? Tishmor, shamor, right? With the exception of halach. Halach is one that sometimes we'll have haloch and then we'll have some other verbs sometimes. Which just means like keep on doing it, right? Of the rarer times when it's functioning as a normal verb or it's as a noun or something, usually you can figure it out if you just come back to it. Okay, I see that, I recognize it's infinitive absolute. Kind of weird that it's here, I'll come back to it. You finish the verse, you come back, it'll fall into place. Okay? So even though it's a little bit of our wild card and a little bit strange, it's overall not too bad.
Interesting.
Yeah, right? Baruch Hashem. It's the spice in our Hebrew grammar. Every once in a while, you'll get something like that, just spicy. Or I really enjoy in the Psalms when you come across like a Phoenician form. Sometimes you get like a verbal form that's not Hebrew, it's Phoenician, right? More that happens more in Job, but sometimes in Psalms. In Job and in Kohelet, a lot of Phoenician stuff, right? Or stuff that's similar to Phoenician. Maybe it's another Semitic language. So and it's not that Hebrew is necessarily borrowing from these other languages. It might be, but it's more likely just that the ancient Hebrew that evolved into all those different Semitic languages in some of the old Psalms have been preserved, or the old stories like Job, they just happen to have those old forms are still part of the Hebrew language or that particular Hebrew dialect, right? So remember, if you ever see something that's too confusing or or just seems out of place grammatically, again, remember we're dealing with a corpus of literature written over 1,000 years, right? And so you're going to have some differences. There's going to be some wise guy poet who doesn't follow the rules, right? He doesn't follow the grammar like he should because hey, it's poetry, right? Or you're going to have somebody with a background where their dialect of Hebrew, they're from, so let's say Ephraim, which had kind of a strange dialect, and they're going to say things differently in the little chunk that we get from them, right? So just try to roll with it. Don't let it bother you too much if it doesn't agree with the grammar. The grammar is there to serve us to make it so we can break down and start to understand what the text says, right? But not everything will always follow the grammar. You're not always going to have et when you should have et, right? You think, even in the Torah, there's places sometimes, why is there not an et here? And so there could be some mystical reason, and we can search for a midrash, see what the sages say. Or it might just be that Moses didn't feel like writing it then. I mean, it's the way that people's treated things like grammar 4,500 years ago, right? Compared to today is very different, right? Today it's almost like, oh, you misspelled that word, right? Or you, we have misspellings in the Hebrew Bible. They're not really misspellings like today. It feels, oh, how dare you say the Bible has a misspelling in it. Let's not use the word misspelling then. Let's call it a variance, right? Sometimes we'll say variance. Or an alternate spelling is how grammar is usually referred to it. So people don't get up in arms, what? You said the Bible is a misspelling. Look, it wasn't a big deal then. Today it sounds like it's a mistake or something. I'm not saying there's a mistake in the Bible. I'm saying it's that guy spelled it differently. He used an aleph instead of a hey. What can I say? In late biblical Hebrew, that happens sometimes. As the aleph starts getting weaker and weaker. Right? People sometimes did that. The Dead Sea Scrolls, if ever you guys want, I don't know, we'll see. Let's see where you are. Next year, Dr. Dwayne and I were going to read through all of the Dead Sea Scroll sectarian manuscripts as part of we kind of do a little studying together, right? So we're going to read through all of the extra biblical texts that they wrote in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew. And I don't know if you guys are advanced enough. If anybody wants to join us, you can do that with us. You can join our group and participate. But if not then sometime later. And you're going to find that in the post-biblical Hebrew, sometimes they add an aleph to a word just to make it easier to read the word, right? It was like a scribal form, right? Because they're dealing with parchment and these kinds of things. Yeah. So try not to be frustrated. Sometimes you'll find the grammar is not obeyed. Okay. And I think kind of the infinitive absolute, in a way, it's like a nice island away from the grammar. It's like, okay, we have very strict grammar in other places, but with this one area, it's freedom. I'm going to use it the way I want to use it poetically. And we have infinitive absolute in various binyanim. We have he-fil infinitive absolutes, like what we just saw. We got kal, right? And we have pl infinitive absolute. So it's okay if you don't master it all right now, right? But it's going to come. It's going to come in. Please don't be frustrated. The purpose of the grammar really, for myself, I'll tell you what happens, having gone through this process, because I did not learn Hebrew as a young child, rather. I wanted to, but we didn't have really a Jewish community in our area. I remember begging my mom to learn Hebrew, right? And, there weren't any teachers around. In my whole city, the B'nai B'rith said there were less than 100 Jews in the city that I grew up in. And so, this had to come later, right? Prepping for bar mitzvah and all that stuff. And so really learning Hebrew as an adult, it's okay. And what you're going to find happens is eventually you'll stop thinking about the grammar. And you're just reading the text, right? You're just reading and understanding. The grammar is kind of like a training wheel to get us to the stage where we can just read with understanding. When the grammar comes up is when you're reading a difficult text like Isaiah. A lot of the portions in Isaiah are very difficult, right? And you'll stop, and then you're going to start thinking about grammar again, right? When you're one of these, okay, why is he doing this? Okay, this is PL, blah, blah, blah. I got to look up this word. That's going to happen. But it's funny. Just the process of studying Hebrew is going to help you guys with some of the stuff in the apostolic writings. Like, you remember when the Ethiopian Jew, he's in a chariot, and he's reading from the scroll of Isaiah? Do you remember that? And I think it's Philip. The Spirit brings Philip to him. And he says, hey, what you reading? And the Philistian Jew, the Ethiopian Jew, says, I'm reading from Isaiah, but I don't understand any of it. Well, I will tell you, friends, when you read Isaiah in the Hebrew, you'll get what he's saying. It is hard. And there's crazy vocabulary in there. He's very poetic in some places. Not all of it's hard, right? Some of it's very straightforward, but there's places. And so once you do that, you'll understand that in a different way, right? I think when most people read that translation, they think he's saying, oh, this prophecy is so strange. What does it mean, right? But he's saying, I don't understand anything. And that to me shows how accurate the Bible is. There really was this guy, and he really did know Hebrew, and he really was reading Isaiah, and he's really thinking, oh my gosh, this scroll that I just bought, right? He probably just bought it. He's in Israel. He's from Ethiopia, right? He's going to buy up what he can afford. He said, what should I get? Probably his rabbi said, get Isaiah. It's very powerful. He bought Isaiah. Maybe he's going to bring it back and share it with his congregation or something back in Ethiopia, because again, nobody had Bibles back then, right? And he's reading it. And he's confused because the Hebrew is kind of hard there. So it's kind of amazing. You'll see their whole different light. When he says, I don't understand, you'll say, oh, right. It's not the same. It's not, So don't be frustrated. Be relaxed. And just always remember, you're reading the sacred text. Even if you're struggling with one or two words and what is this? Why is he using this way? You are wrestling with the text. This is what it is to be Yisrael. You're struggling with the divine.